Praise God, brothers and sisters. It's good to see everybody here. I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody had a nice turkey and a family dinner yesterday. I'd like to begin my sermon by opening up our Bibles to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. I'll be reading from verses 1 to 14, and then we'll break it down a little bit. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people to be happy and to do good while they live, that they each may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, and nothing can be taken away from it. God does it so people will fear him. Everything that God has created has a purpose, and one of his greatest creations is time. As we just read, there's a time for everything. Right now is a time of Thanksgiving, a time of harvest. Here behind me, we see the result of time, all the fruits and vegetables. You and I also are a product of time. We have grown to become the people who we are today over the many years, from going through schools, from church, and we have grown physically from infants to teens, from infants to kids to teens to youth and to some of us adults, and hopefully along with more time we will become parents or even grandparents. If my slideshow isn't up there. Alrighty. With the creation of time, the effect of waiting also came. We've all waited for something in our lives, whether it's for a job promotion, a life's partner, healing from an illness, or a direction for our future. I want to explain the reasons of waiting in our lives by explaining the growth through a plant. It all begins with just a small seed. Just like planting the seed is the beginning of our faith. Our spiritual journey starts with a small act of faith or a desire that God plants in our hearts. Choosing to accept God's will is like planting that little seed that God gives you. First, you receive the vision of okay, I want to become an engineer. That's just a thought. But for you to actually plant that seed is to begin doing some action in order for that dream or that seed to grow. In the Bible, we have many examples of a vision or a goal that God sets out for the people. For example, in the story of Abraham and Sarah, in Genesis 15:5, God took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them." Then he said, "So shall your offspring be." Or let's look at the story of Joseph. And when he's a kid, he receives a dream from God about how great he's going to be. In both of these stories, we see God giving a vision to our heroes that, hey, sometime in the future, there will be this goal or this destination of you either becoming great or having a great nation from you. Now, in our lives, when we want to achieve a God-willed vision, whether it's to get a degree in something, to become a businessman or a woman, or to become, for example, a preacher, it always begins with that dream, with that desire that God plants in our hearts. Once the seed has been planted and watered, which is when we put in the initiative to start working on that dream and goal, the roots will begin to grow. Now, if this vision is God-willed, meaning that God allows it to happen, whether for the good or for your bad, there will be seasons of waiting. One second, sweet. Let's keep going. Okay. When you plant a seed and water, usually usually grows underground. You can't see anything growing, but you believe that it's going to grow because obviously it's underground and it still has to spread its roots. And eventually it'll sprout out and you'll see a stem. You don't just lose hope because you just planted it and you didn't get the apple tree right away that you planted. In the story of Abraham and Sarah, we see that Abraham believed what the Lord said, that he will have a multitude, a generational of kids, like the stars in the heavens, even though he's already in his old age and his wife can't bear kids anymore, but he still chooses to believe the Lord. And now in our lives, for those that are wanting to achieve a diploma, or it begins by applying for schools. You might not be accepted to the one that you wanted to. For the entrepreneurs, you try different business ideas, and the majority of them either don't work out or just aren't profitable. For the preachers of you here, you might mess up once or twice on stage your first time, but you don't give up. You keep pursuing and keep trying again. Your business didn't take off from the first time. This doesn't mean you should give up on your vision. There's so many different business ideas that you could try. There's so many other ways you could make a successful business. But after some time, you'll find that business, you'll find that school that you've been wanting to go to. You'll find the courage and wisdom to go back up on stage and preach. Your roots have started to grow. You've started something. There's a foundation. After the roots have started to grow, there's usually some time of silence, the slow growth where nothing impressive really happens. You start going to your classes, you start your business advertising, your business venture, you start meeting up with people. You take some preaching classes, you start going to Bible college, ministering at Sunday school, kids camp, teens camp. It becomes your day-to-day life. Nothing impressive, nothing really worth noting. But this is where the steady growth happens, your day-to-day life, But the most notable times in the process of growing this seed, of this vision, this goal happening, are the challenging times. Times where we begin to doubt God because we are overwhelmed or anxious, because we are discouraged and sad of something that happened in our lives, some sort of obstacle. They will come in our lives one point or another, in every single dream or ambition that we ever have. Looking back at the story of Joseph receives a dream from God about his future greatness, but this dream causes jealousy amongst his brothers to where he is sold into slavery and later imprisoned for a crime that he didn't commit. Joseph, being young, probably couldn't have imagined that something like this could happen to him after receiving such an amazing and glorious vision from God that the heavenly realm was going to be literally bowing down to him. The sun, the moon, and all the stars are going to be bowing down to him. I really hope that none of you have to go through what Joseph had to go through just to get to where he's at. But through suffering, you can achieve a lot of different things. One of my favorite Bible verses is Romans chapter 5, verses 3-4. We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. There's a reason why God allows these challenges and tribulations into our lives. There was a study done on two of the exact same plants. One plant was grown in ideal conditions. It had enough water, it had enough nutrients, the protein, everything that it needed to survive and grow healthy and strong. And one thing, it was also grown inside, so there was no wind. There's nothing to protect it from the real world. Another plant was grown in a lot more harsh conditions. It had a lack of water, a lack of nutrients, limited resources, and it was just terrible, As they grew, you could see the impact of these two plants. One of them grew nicely, big leaves, but a very skinny and slim stem. The other one had a rich and thick barked stem, but tiny leaves. Then, after a certain time, these two plants were planted outside into the real world with real world conditions. And what do you think? Which one of them survived? The one that had to survive through the harsh conditions because it was ready for the real world. It had to go through the challenging conditions. Because when the winds came and it blew up on the plants, the one with the big leaves collapsed within a few weeks. The one with the strong, sturdy stem was able to withstand the hard conditions of the world. If we continue reading the story of Joseph, we read that even through the challenges he was put through of being sold into slavery, and wrongly imprisoned, Joseph trusted in God, and his faithfulness to God increased. Creating that thick and sturdy stem and those strong roots that our growth needs to take on further challenges in life. Joseph's faithfulness was rewarded as he was eventually released from prison, and he interpreted one of the Pharaoh's dreams, predicting the 7 years of abundance and the 7 years of famine. This interpretation led Joseph to be elevated to a great authority and responsibility, which is still part of the process of what God's vision for him was. A plant also needs to be pruned. Pruning is where you selectively remove certain parts of a plant, like the branches, the leaves, or even the roots. And the purpose of pruning is to improve the plant's health or growth and the productivity of the plant. We read in John chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does not bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. God is our spiritual gardener. He prunes our lives, removing aspects that are not fruitful and the ones that are harming us. Whether it's God removing certain friends from our lives, not allowing us to achieve certain jobs, certain positions in our lives. There's ways that God prunes us that we might not understand now, but later on we will be thankful for it. Pruning away our bad habits, our attitudes, or even relationships that might hinder our spiritual growth. In order to elevate you to the next phase, you will need to be pruned, to promote our spiritual growth and productivity with God. And after months, days, and sometimes years, the plant will finally begin to bear fruit. In our case, this is the result of our perseverance. Eventually, after some time, our plant is going to go from a seed to a fruit-bearing plant. And to ending our story with Joseph, we read in Genesis 45, verse 7, Joseph speaks to his brothers, saying, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve you for a remnant on earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. It took in total, I think it was 17 years he was 17 years when he got that vision from God, and it took him 22 years to get to that point to where the vision of God came true. 22 years. Sometimes the visions, the seeds that are planted into our hearts can take years, if not maybe even decades. But oftentimes, it's probably going to be months in order to teach you some sort of lesson. Some of you are 17 here. Could you imagine going through 22 years of waiting, through prison and being sold into slavery, after receiving such a glorious dream from God where you became a king or the queen of Egypt? Why couldn't God have just made Joseph the king of Egypt right away? Why couldn't God have just made him the king of Egypt right away? He could have. Just like Jesus could have called down the 12 legions of angels to rescue him off the cross when he was suffering that inhumane death. There's a reason for the suffering. There's a reason why this happens. There's a reason why you're going through whatever you're going through. You all have dreams and goals of what you want to become, of what you want to achieve in your life. And God has a great plan for each and every single one of you. There's a destination, but we don't know how we're going to get there. When we give up our lives to Christ, we don't know what kind of obstacles, what kind of the temptations the devil has set up for us to try and discourage us and take us away from Christ. But we know that we fight the good fight and we remain faithful. There's a crown of righteousness which the Lord, the righteous judge, has prepared for us. At the appointed time, with perseverance, we'll be able to achieve this. You will see the results of your patience, of your waiting, of your faithfulness. Something that I want you guys to take away from this is God created time, and there's a time for everything. And with the time came waiting. Going back to our story of Abraham and Sarah, they tried to expedite God's plan by trying to bear a child with Sarah's handmaid, but that led to unforeseen consequences, and they definitely regretted it. There's a reason that God makes us wait. Whether it's a lesson to be learned, a character trait to be developed, a challenge to face, God allows us to go through these times of trouble to build us, to strengthen us. And it's important that we trust God and that we continue to grow in Him, to grow that thick stem and to grow those deep roots, to trust in Him, and He will guide us through it all. When you go through the storms in your life and don't understand what's going on or why, remember the story of the apostles and Jesus when they were on that boat going through the storm. Jesus was sleeping on the boat, and the apostles were freaking out. They didn't understand why this is happening. They have God with them right there. And they're like, "We're dying. Jesus, why are you sleeping?" Jesus woke up and calmed the storm. Just because God is silent, that doesn't mean He isn't present. Call for Him. He is there. He's waiting for you. There's only one way the seed won't grow is if that seed isn't planted. That's the only 100% way that you won't achieve your goals or dreams. If you never begin, if you never start. I know we all have a lot of goals and ambitions in our lives, something we want to achieve. But think about it. If you don't go talk to that person that you want to talk to, if you don't go start going to school for that degree, if you don't risk it for that business, how are you going to get there if you haven't even started? Eventually, after some years, after some perseverance, for 3 years of university, you will get that degree that you were seeking. After months or years, you will succeed in your business. After many practices, you will be able to preach. It's going to take many sleepless nights, skipping your hangouts, and many different struggles. But we know that God will make a way even when it seems like there is no way. I'd like to read Romans chapter 8, verses 28. In all things, God works for the good of them, those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose, that even in times of waiting and adversity, God is working for our ultimate good. I'd like for all of us to pray. Stand up and pray. And let us ask God for patience, for strength, and to trust Him in that growth process that some of us might be going through right now. Let's rise up and pray, church.